August 16th, 2026. Right now, Hurricane Lala's eye wall is brushing directly against the southern coast of Hawaii's Big Island, and if any part of this storm's core makes landfall, it will be the first hurricane to directly strike the state of Hawaii in more than 30 years. Just 2 days ago, this storm was still a tropical storm, tracking well south of the islands, expected to pass at a safe distance. Then its forecast track shifted north, and that single shift turned a storm most people weren't worried about into one that's now knocked out power to more than 76,000 customers, shut down 2 major airports, closed commercial ports across 2 counties, and prompted the deployment of nearly 200 National Guard troops. So today we're breaking down exactly how Lala took this dangerous turn, why its current position puts Hawaii directly in the most dangerous part of the storm, how this compares to the handful of hurricanes that have threatened the islands before, and what residents across the state need to know as this storm continues moving through this weekend. Before we get into it, subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon, because Lala's exact track and strength have already shifted meaningfully once this week, and they could shift again before this storm finally clears the islands. Drop a comment right now. If you're anywhere in Hawaii right now, tell me what conditions actually look like where you are. I want to hear directly from people living through this, not just the official numbers. Let's start with exactly how Lala got here, because the story of this storm's track is genuinely the whole story. As recently as Thursday, Lala was a tropical storm tracking through the central Pacific on a path that was expected to keep it at a comfortable distance from the Hawaiian Islands. Then, according to CNN's coverage at the time, Lala's forecast track shifted north, bringing the strengthening storm, along with its heavy rain, damaging winds, and dangerous surf, considerably closer to the Big Island than anyone had been planning for just a day earlier. That shift was significant enough that a hurricane warning went into effect for Hawaii County specifically, meaning hurricane conditions were now expected somewhere on the Big Island by the weekend, a genuinely serious escalation from a storm that had been expected to pass by largely unnoticed. By Saturday, Lala had made good on that shifted track. The storm officially strengthened into a Category 1 hurricane as it closed in on the Big Island, and by Saturday morning, the National Hurricane Center had it packing sustained winds of 75 miles an hour, swirling about 120 miles south of Hilo. Lala made its closest approach to the Big Island Saturday afternoon, and as of Saturday night, its eye wall, the ring of the most powerful winds, thunderstorms, and heaviest rain that encircles a hurricane's calm center, was actively brushing the southern portion of the island. Forecasters said it remained genuinely unclear whether Lala's core would make full landfall or continue tracking just offshore, but either outcome puts Hawaii in an extraordinarily rare position. A hurricane hasn't made landfall in the state since Hurricane Iniki struck back in 1992. More than 3 decades ago, meaning what's unfolding on the Big Island right now would be a genuinely historic event for the state, regardless of the exact technical outcome of whether the center crosses onto land. To understand why this storm's specific position matters so much, it's worth understanding a detail meteorologists have been emphasizing throughout their coverage of Lala: the concept of a hurricane's dirty side. Lala has become only the 5th hurricane since 1957 to pass within 70 miles of the Big Island, joining a short list that includes Hurricane Hone in 2024, Hurricane Douglas in 2020, Hurricane Iselle in 2014, and Hurricane Kanoa back in 1957, according to NOAA's historical database. That's a genuinely rare occurrence on its own, but Lala's specific track, with its center passing just south of the island rather than farther out to sea, puts the Hawaiian Islands directly in what meteorologists call the storm's dirty side. In the northern hemisphere, a hurricane's winds rotate counterclockwise around its center, and a side of the storm where that rotation combines with the storm's own forward motion typically produces the strongest sustained winds, the heaviest rainfall, and the most dangerous storm surge, precisely the side you don't want to be sitting on if you can avoid it. With Lala's center tracking just south of the Big Island's southernmost point, the islands have ended up positioned directly within that most dangerous quadrant of the storm, which explains why impacts have been as severe as they have been, even without a fully confirmed direct landfall. The rainfall totals coming out of this storm are genuinely extraordinary. The National Hurricane Center has warned of life-threatening flooding and mudslides, especially across the Big Island's steep volcanic terrain, and forecasters say the storm will dump more than a foot of rain across much of the island, with isolated amounts potentially topping 2 feet in the hardest-hit spots. Some mountain slope rain gauges had already recorded between 10 and 18 inches of rain from Lala as of Saturday afternoon, with parts of the eastern Big Island and eastern Maui already picking up 3 to 8 inches on top of that. To put that in perspective, 25 inches of rain falling across a single island in the span of a couple of days represents a genuinely catastrophic volume of water, more than many regions of the world see across several months combined, all concentrated into one storm system moving across steep, volcanic terrain that channels water downhill fast. Exactly the kind of setup that produces the flash flooding and mudslide risk officials are warning about so urgently. The practical impact across the islands has already been significant and is continuing to grow as the storm works through the region. As of Saturday evening, roughly 76,000 customers were without power statewide, according to the utility tracking service poweroutage.us, representing about 15% of all residents across the state. Hawaii's own emergency management agency reported widespread downed trees and power lines across the Big Island specifically, and the agency has been direct in its public messaging, urging people to stay indoors and off the roads entirely while conditions remain dangerous. Hawaiian Electric, the state's power utility, pointed to wind gusts upward of 60 miles an hour as the main driver behind the outages, explaining that trees and debris blown into power lines have been the primary cause, and the utility specifically told residents to plan for the possibility of extended outages rather than assuming power would be restored quickly once the worst of the wind passed. Transportation across the islands has been significantly disrupted as well. Hilo International Airport and Ellison-Onizuka Kona International Airport, both located on the Big Island, were temporarily shuttered as the storm moved through. More than 200 flights were canceled across Hawaii on Saturday alone as Lala approached, according to FlightAware, and commercial ports across both Big Island and Maui County were closed to shipping traffic. Norwegian Cruise Line confirmed that some of its scheduled itineraries in the region would be affected as well, a reminder that a storm like this doesn't just disrupt daily life for residents, it ripples out through the broader tourism and shipping economy that so much of Hawaii's infrastructure depends on. Flooding has already closed some roads directly, including sections in the city of Hilo and areas to the south near Mountain View and Hawaiian Paradise, communities that sit in some of the more flood-prone, low-lying terrain on the eastern side of the island. In response to the scale of the disruption, Hawaii mobilized approximately 180 National Guard members to assist with the broader emergency response effort, according to the state's emergency management agency. That kind of Guard deployment reflects just how seriously state officials are treating this storm, not just as a weather event to monitor, but as a genuine emergency requiring active, coordinated response resources on the ground across multiple islands simultaneously. It's worth walking through exactly which parts of the state are under which specific warnings right now, because the threat level genuinely varies depending on where in the island chain you are. A hurricane warning remains in effect specifically for the Big Island, where hurricane-force winds were expected to persist through Saturday night. A tropical storm warning covers Maui County, which includes the islands of Maui, Lanai, Molokai, and Kahu'ulave, along with separate tropical storm warnings for both Oahu and Kauai County, covering Kauai and Niihau as well. Flood watches have been issued across the entire Hawaiian island chain, given how much moisture this storm is carrying, and a flash flood warning specifically covers much of the Big Island, including the Hilo area, as repeated bands of heavy rain continue moving across the region. Looking ahead at exactly how this storm is expected to behave over the coming days, forecasters say Lala may take a bit of a northwestward jog before curling toward the west-northwest on Sunday. The storm's core interacting directly with the Big Island's mountainous volcanic terrain is expected to cause at least some weakening, since land interaction generally disrupts a hurricane's structure and cuts off some of its access to the warm ocean water it depends on for fuel. Lala is then expected to depart to the west of the islands by Monday, at which point it could spend a significant stretch of time, potentially over a week, tracking across the central and western Pacific, still classified as either a hurricane or, if it crosses into a different forecasting zone, potentially reclassified as a typhoon, though by that point it would be far removed from any populated landmass and primarily a story for meteorologists rather than a direct threat to anyone. CBS News reported that hurricane conditions were expected to persist on the Big Island into Saturday night specifically, before Lala's center moves south of the smaller islands on Sunday and Monday, and forecasters noted the storm would likely maintain roughly its current strength right up until it passes the Big Island, at which point that terrain interaction should cause it to weaken more significantly as it continues on its way west. It's genuinely worth taking a moment to explain why a hurricane making landfall in Hawaii is such a rare event in the first place. Because it's not simply random chance. There's real atmospheric science behind why the islands have gone more than 3 decades without a direct hit. Hawaii sits in a part of the Central Pacific where a combination of factors generally works against hurricanes reaching the islands at full strength. Cooler ocean waters surrounding the islands, compared to the warmer waters storms typically track through earlier in their life cycle, tend to sap a hurricane's strength as it approaches, and the specific wind patterns in the region often steer storms either north or south of the island chain entirely, exactly the kind of near-miss pattern that's played out with most of the handful of storms that have passed close to Hawaii in recent decades. That's part of why this specific list is so short. Just 4 other storms since 1957 have passed within 70 miles of the Big Island before Lala, and only one storm during that entire stretch, Hurricane Iniki in 1992, actually made a full, direct landfall. Iniki remains the benchmark disaster for the state when it comes to hurricane risk, a powerful storm that struck the island of Kauai directly and caused billions of dollars in damage along with several deaths. And it's exactly the kind of historical reference point that's been on the minds of both officials and residents throughout this entire week, as Lala's track kept shifting closer and closer to a genuine direct hit. There's a broader climate context worth understanding here too, because a storm like Lala reaching hurricane strength this close to Hawaii isn't happening in a vacuum. Warmer ocean waters across the Pacific, part of the same broader pattern of rising sea surface temperatures covered extensively in earlier storm coverage on this channel, provide more available fuel for tropical systems to draw on as they develop and track across open water. While Hawaii's immediate surrounding waters have historically run cooler than storms prefer, a warmer overall ocean means storms can potentially maintain more of their strength for longer as they approach the islands than might have been typical in past decades, exactly the kind of dynamic that's worth watching as a longer-term trend, even beyond any single storm like Lala. Given everything covered so far, here's the honest, complete picture of where things stand right now. Hurricane Lala has become a genuinely historic weather event for Hawaii, only the 5th storm in nearly 70 years of record-keeping to pass this close to the Big Island, and positioned in exactly the most dangerous quadrant relative to the islands, given its track just south of the coastline. More than 76,000 people are without power, 2 major airports have been shuttered, commercial ports across 2 counties are closed, nearly 200 National Guard troops are actively deployed, and forecasters are warning of life-threatening flooding and mudslides from rainfall totals that could approach or exceed 2 feet in the hardest-hit spots on the Big Island. Whether Lala's core technically crosses onto land or continues brushing just offshore, the practical impact for residents across the state has already reached a scale that hasn't been seen in Hawaii in more than 3 decades. So here's what's actually worth doing if you're anywhere in Hawaii right now, or have family and friends in the islands you're trying to stay updated on. If you're on the Big Island specifically, follow the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency's direct guidance to stay indoors and off the roads, given both the active hurricane-force wind conditions and the widespread reports of downed trees and power lines making travel genuinely dangerous right now. If you're in a low-lying or flood-prone area anywhere on the islands, particularly around Hilo, Mountain View, or Hawaiian Paradise, where roads have already closed due to flooding, avoid any unnecessary travel and never attempt to drive through a flooded roadway, regardless of how familiar or shallow it might look, given how much rain this storm has already dumped and how much more is still expected. If you live anywhere on steep hillside terrain, particularly across the Big Island's volcanic landscape, stay alert for any signs of ground movement or mudslide activity, especially as rainfall totals continue climbing toward the higher end of the forecast range, and know your evacuation route to safer ground in case conditions in your specific area deteriorate further. If you've lost power, treat any downed line you encounter as live, regardless of appearance. And if you're relying on a phone for updates, keep it charged and conserve battery where possible, given how widespread outages have already become across the state. If you have upcoming travel plans to Hawaii, particularly to the Big Island, expect continued flight disruption beyond what's already happened, given that more than 200 flights were already canceled Saturday alone. And check directly with your airline for updated status rather than assuming normal operations will resume immediately once the storm's center moves past the islands, since airport reopening and full flight schedule restoration typically take additional time even after the worst of a storm's direct impact has passed. If you have cruise plans through the region, check directly with your cruise line given Norwegian's confirmation that at least some scheduled itineraries are being affected, and expect that other operators in the region may be managing similar adjustments. And regardless of which specific island you're on, continue monitoring official National Weather Service and Hawaii Emergency Management Agency updates directly, rather than relying on secondhand reports, since Lala's exact track and intensity have already shifted meaningfully multiple times over just the past few days, and the most current, authoritative guidance will always come from those official channels, rather than from any single snapshot of the forecast. Stepping back from the immediate details, here's the piece of this story worth genuinely sitting with as Lala continues working through the islands. This storm's dangerous turn wasn't really about it becoming a dramatically more powerful hurricane out of nowhere. It was about a relatively modest shift in forecast track, moving the storm's center close enough to bring the islands into that most dangerous, dirty side of the storm's circulation, transforming what looked like a comfortable near miss into what could become the first direct hurricane landfall in Hawaii in more than 30 years. That's a genuinely important lesson embedded in this specific storm, The difference between a hurricane passing safely offshore and one causing historic disruption can come down to a shift in track of only a few dozen miles, which is exactly why storm forecasts, even ones that look reassuring several days out, deserve continued close attention right up until a system has genuinely cleared the area, rather than being treated as settled the moment an initial forecast suggests a safe distance. We'll keep tracking Lala closely as it continues moving through and past the Hawaiian Islands over the coming days. Whether its core ultimately makes a confirmed direct landfall on the Big Island, how quickly power and transportation infrastructure gets restored across the affected islands, and what this storm's eventual path across the central and western Pacific looks like once it clears Hawaii entirely. Subscribe and hit that bell icon right now so you don't miss those updates, because this storm's track has already proven it can shift meaningfully with only a few days' notice. And drop that comment below if you haven't yet, wherever you're watching from, whether you're riding this out directly in Hawaii or simply following along as this rare storm continues to unfold. See you in the next one.